Hi, folks. Thanks for joining. We'll just give it a minute or two for people to join. While people are joining, if they want to drop their name, where they're dialing in from in the chat, be good to see where people are from, and great to have so many of you. Feel free to use the chat. Thanks for those who are joining us. We'll just give it another minute, give people time to trickle in, and then we'll get started. Oh, apologies. It says chat is disabled. Okay. I think that's just coming to me then. I'm sorry. I've promised people an interactive chat and that's not happening. Bear with us. I'm not sure if we can adjust that, but we'll work to have folks' questions answered in just a second. For now, sorry that you can't share your whereabouts. Very exciting to see all of you joining, and we'll get started in just a minute. Okay, I reckon we'll kick off. G'day, everyone. I'm Michael Chato. I'm the Executive Director of the New Israel Fund. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I'm dialing in from the Gadigal lands of the Eora Nation. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, recognizing that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Sovereignty was never ceded. So thank you all for joining on a Tuesday evening, a difficult Tuesday evening, much like many of the evenings of the past, as this war goes on for far too long and the prospect of war on other fronts continues to rage on. It's been really difficult news over the past 10 months, but really difficult news over the past weekend and week. And so I appreciate all of you showing up. It's great to be in community, whether online or in person. So thank you. Thank you in particular to our visiting guest. I'll turn it over to him in just a second. But before I do, I just wanted to say that the New Israel Fund really exists for moments like this. We bring together folks to discuss these important concepts because we know that while there may be challenges at the moment and there may be extremists on many sides hijacking the current state of affairs, we are always focused on raising funds in diaspora communities to support human and civil rights organizations on the ground. We know that there will be a day after extremists have fallen from leadership in various parts, and that will be a day where civil society will lead us to a better future. It'll lead us to a better future, which we at NIF are proud to hope for as two states, but whether it be one state, two states, a land for all, that's a question that Ittay is going to help us navigate. So Ittay Flescher is a Melbourne-born, Jerusalem-based journalist, writer, and educator, and we're so lucky to have him. He is really, really excellent at making these difficult concepts easy to understand. So thank you, Ittay, for being on this Tuesday afternoon, your time. We're really appreciative and we're really looking forward to this conversation. There will be opportunities to ask questions of Ittay, but for now, I think I'll just turn it over to Ittay to lead us through this complex conversation of what potential future solutions could look like for us all. So thank you. Ittay, over to you.
Thank you, Masar Khair, Erev Tov. It's wonderful to be with you here from my home in Jerusalem. I'll just, before we get into the topic, also just say I know a lot of people on this Zoom are close friends of mine, and a lot of you have really reached out from all over the world to check in on me and shown a lot of kindness to me. So I really appreciate all of the concern and all the messages that have come through over the past 10 months. And also just a word about this topic. So even though I chose this topic, it's also kind of a strange topic to talk about because it's all about solutions. But we here are not problems. We Israelis and Palestinians are people, and we're not a problem that needs to be solved. But I think it's interesting still to begin by thinking about what solutions are. But I'll come back to the idea of the challenge of looking at this as only a problem that needs solving. So with that, I'll begin. Okay. So, and I don't know if Michael mentioned this, but people are welcome to ask questions in the chat throughout the presentation, and I won't be reading them, but Michael will read them, and Michael will be able to either answer them or ask me, and I'll be able to answer the questions. So even though we can't see each other, I'd love to hear your thoughts, comments, suggestions, insights, feelings, all of that, because you know, the teacher in me always feels a bit strange teaching just to myself. I like to feel the other people in the room, even though there's a giant ocean that separates us at the moment. So one state, two states, a land for all. So today we're going to look at a number of the, I guess, popular solutions that people have presented, the popular solutions that are around now, some of their strengths, some of their weaknesses, some things you may have heard about them, some things you may not know about them, in a way to think about the future, because often when we think about the reality, it's incredibly depressing. The hostages still there after over 320 days, the incredible death and destruction in Gaza, so many people displaced from their homes. It's you know, I'm not a poet, but like the nature of what we see is something that words can't describe. It's really unfathomable. And so I'm trying to sort of think about the day this ends and what will happen the day after. And so that's where I wanted to begin. So the first solution that people talk about is called a one-state solution. It's one state called Palestine. And under that solution, the Jews would leave this country. The people who advocate a one-state solution generally do so because they believe that a return to the pre-48 borders of mandatory Palestine would be the fairest solution for Palestinians. It would give historic justice to Palestinians and refugees from the Nakba, allowing all Palestinians to return home, and it would undo the injustice that was the creation of the Jewish state, as many Palestinians would see that. I mean, that's a solution supported by groups like Hamas, by Hezbollah, by the Islamic Republic of Iran, by the Houthis, and a lot of what we've seen happen in the last, since October 7th, has been to achieve that solution. This is a quote from Hassan Nasrallah, who said in January 2024, every Israeli has a second nationality and has a big bag ready, and has his bag ready for reverse Jewish migration. Hundreds of thousands have already left. If you are an Israeli with an American passport, go to America. With a British passport, go to England. With a French passport, go to France. You Israelis have only this future. The land of Palestine, from the river to sea, is for Palestinians only. Hamas and many other groups talk about that as the desired solution, and act in a way to realize that, in the hope that Israelis will eventually pack up and leave and go to other countries. I don't need to say much more about that solution because I don't think there's anyone sort of questioning that, but it's something you hear a lot as the spark, as the motivator for all of the attacks that we've seen on Israel last year. There's another form of one state solution where the state is also called Palestine, but Jews remain here. Some people who advocate for that solution include people like Ahmed Tibi, who's a member of Knesset, and he talks about this place being a binational state, or a state for all its citizens. And in his vision, this is from an interview he had with Haaretz, he said, we will annul the Declaration of Independence and its place, write a civil declaration that represents all citizens, Jews, Muslims, Christians, and Druze, the entire public. It's untenable for a democratic state to have a Declaration of Independence that is fundamentally Jewish. The country would be open to all Jews and Palestinians from everywhere in the world. There would be equality in entering the country and in returning to all citizens, Jews and Arabs. The law of return embodies the state's Jewishness, which I do not accept. So essentially what this would do was it would turn Israel into a democratic country that doesn't favor one religious or ethnic group over another. So think, I don't know, New Zealand, Norway, Sweden, a place like that. And there would still be people here that have different religious identities, but the state wouldn't uphold or be a representative of any of those religious identities. So obviously Jews that support this too, people like Peter Beinart wrote an article about this. There are some Jewish Israelis who support this, but it's a very, very small number. But the idea of this is that there shouldn't be any sort of hierarchies in this state, and by having a state for all its citizens, everyone would be equal, and then we would all live in peace. That's the other version of the one-state solution. This was a demonstration outside the DNC where Kamala Harris was selected as the Democratic nominee. You can see here people were chanting, "Palestine is almost free," which is an interesting slogan to be chanting at a time where Palestine is going through its worst ever catastrophe. But there's a feeling of people who support this solution that somewhere very close around the corner, this is imminently going to happen. There's imminently going to be a one-state solution here, and that it will be Palestine, and we just need to fight and believe and protest a little bit more, and that day will come very soon. And it's something that I find hard to believe that people think that, but it is something that people think and chant in places like Chicago. Okay, the next solution is another form of one-state solution where the one state is Israel. Under this solution, the whole country from the river to the sea would be Israel, so there wouldn't be any form of Palestinian state. This was actually subject of a vote in the Knesset very recently. It was on the 18th of July, where the Knesset voted to say that, this is the exact wording of the vote: the Knesset firmly opposes the establishment of a Palestinian state west of the Jordan. The establishment of a Palestinian state in the heart of the land of Israel will pose an existential danger to the state of Israel and its citizens. It would only be a matter of short time until Hamas takes over the Palestinian state and turns it into a radical Islamic terror base. Promoting the idea of a Palestinian state at this time will be a reward for terrorism. That resolution was passed by the Knesset with members of both the coalition and the opposition voting for it. It passed 68 votes to 9. No Zionist party voted against it. And the 9 MKs who voted against it were all from the Arab parties. So I think that vote kind of reflects the mood in Israel at the moment, that the majority of people here do not want to see a Palestinian state created, and that vote is very much an expression of that. Recently, Spain, Ireland, and Norway voted to recognize a Palestinian state, and Israel's former foreign minister, he's not the foreign minister anymore because there's a rotation system, but he was until a year ago. He said Spain, this is his Twitter account, Spain, Ireland, Norway want to give a state to these monsters who murdered, slaughtered, raped, and kidnapped our people. They want to reward terrorism. From the river to the sea, there will only be one state, state of Israel. The one-state solution being only Israel is supported by the Netanyahu coalition, by evangelical Christians, Republicans, and many Zionist organizations as well. In terms of making the one-state solution a reality or entrenching it even further, because what currently exists at the moment, there was in January a conference held in Jerusalem, attended by some 5,000 people, calling to resettle Gaza. About a dozen members of Knesset, including Itamar Ben-Gvir, attended this rally. There was like a real estate stand where you could put your name down for a plot of land in Gaza under the heading Hitshashvut Mevia Bitachon, which is settlement brings security. This is not, you can't actually buy land to settle in Gaza, but there's already groups that are thinking of how to make this a reality, that when the war ends, that Jews could return as they were in Gush Katif back to those places. There was also a law passed in 2024 that undid the disengagement law. So for those that don't remember, in 2005, Israel removed the settlers from Gaza and from 4 settlements in the West Bank. This law reverses that law. So it says people can return to places that were abandoned by Israel in 2005, which some people say lays the groundwork for returning to those 4 settlements in the West Bank, but also returning to Gaza. And then in June of this year, the IDF basically handed most authority for civilian life away from the military to a civilian administrator, who is pictured here. And what that means is that Hillel Roth, who's a close association of Bezalel Smotrich, is essentially now the authority for civilian matters in the West Bank. So you no longer have a military administration over people that might live in Ramallah, Tulkarem, or Jenin, but you now have a civilian administration that controls everything from real estate transactions, land and water arrangements, protection of holy spaces, who can access Rachel's tomb, forestry laws, tourism, all of that sort of thing. And so many people look at this as an act of annexation and an act of furthering the notion of a one-state solution that is only Israel. Then there's also been in July the largest appropriation of state land in the West Bank since the Oslo Accords, and I think a very hostile stance to any agreement that would end the war or return the hostages from the people who support this solution, like Bezalel Smotrich, who sees a hostage deal as a victory for Hamas, and he even created this little image you can see here of Yahya Sinwar with the V for Victory sign, saying that that any deal would be a victory, and therefore we must never surrender and keep fighting until the bitter end. In terms of what Gaza looks like today, so before the war, Gaza looked like this, and then during the war, a 1 kilometer buffer zone was created around Gaza that takes up about 16% of the land. So 16% is now not accessible to Palestinians in Gaza because it's a buffer zone to prevent further attacks as happened on October 7th. Then after that, a further piece of land called the Netzarim corridor was established, which essentially breaks the northern half to the southern half of Gaza. So no one's allowed in the Netzarim corridor either at the moment, which means that 26% of Gaza is now a no-go zone for Palestinians. But then add to that the areas where there's fighting and the areas where there's humanitarian zones, meaning a place where you can be safe from fighting, according to the Israeli government. This was a leaflet that was dropped on Gaza this week. And the area that is now a humanitarian zone, which means an area that is safe, apparently safe for Palestinians, is only 11% of the Gaza Strip. So 1.9 million out of Gaza's 2.3 million people are now living in this tiny yellow area that you can see highlighted on the map. And that's the only area that's considered safe. Now, if there was a hostage deal, one of the things in the negotiation is that Palestinians will be able to return to all the places in Gaza where they originally lived before October 7th. And that is something that Israel is not agreeing to at the moment. But a lot of people look at maps like this and think, how can you squeeze such large amounts of people into such small amounts of territory that keep shrinking? To have 1.9 million people in this tiny area is very concerning, and a lot of Palestinians look to this as a sign that says that that Israel is planning to resettle Gaza, and that's why this area is shrinking so much. Israel is arguing in response that this is necessary to defeat Hamas and to reduce civilian casualties, although most people are looking at what's happening in Gaza and struggle to see Israel making sufficient efforts to do that. In terms of Netanyahu has not said that he wants to resettle Gaza. He's actually spoken out against the people that have said that. When he has stated the purpose of this war, he said that there's 3 purposes. The first is to return all our hostages. The second is to complete the elimination of Hamas from the entire Gaza Strip. And the third is to ensure Gaza will no longer constitute a threat to Israel. And on April 4th, he said, we are a step away from victory. So there's also a sense within his thinking that victory is imminent, that the people sort of pushing now for a hostage deal or anything that may end the war, are denying the brave soldiers the victory they deserved and they fought so hard for. And I think this notion of victory being just around the corner is probably what propels many's coalition to support the war and to keep fighting, in the hope that Israel will win, that these three goals will be realized. I'm not exactly sure how they will be realized, but that's the sort of thinking of those in that one-state solution camp. This is a bit of graffiti that is near a pier that was built in Gaza. It says in Hebrew, Bli Tashvut ein nitzachon, which translates to, without settlement, there will be no victory. Okay, the next solution is called the two-state solution. The two-state solution is supported by many liberal Zionists. It's also supported by many Palestinian citizens of Israel. For liberal Zionists, this solution is largely motivated both by an ideal of fairness, that two people should have a state, and also by demography. These are numbers from 2020, but more recent numbers, the Jewish population in Israel is actually 7.2 million now. But as you can see from this table, there's roughly equal numbers of Jewish Israelis and Palestinians who live between the river and the sea. The Palestinians have three different statuses between Gaza, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Palestinian citizens of Israel. But more or less, the numbers are roughly equal. And so people who look at those numbers say, well, when you've got equal numbers, does it make sense that there's only one state with one form of national self-determination, and therefore there should be two states? This is a breakdown of the numbers in a bit more detail, where you can see this is from 2021, that the number of Arab citizens of Israel or Palestinians from the West Bank and Gaza is now 48.3%, and the number of Jews is 48.3% as well. How does the two-state solution look like? So the two-state solution that probably that we most know of was what was negotiated in the Geneva Accord by both Israeli and Palestinian moderates. It looks like you can see on the map where the green area would be Palestine, the blue area would be Israel. There would probably be some land swaps where the areas in blue would be annexed to Israel and the areas in green would be Israeli territory that would be annexed to Palestine, so that you have roughly equal land. There would be a corridor between Gaza and the West Bank, and there would be some sort of firm border, an exchange of ambassadors, recognition in the same way that exists between two other states. But the idea of the two-state solution is, some people call it a divorce. It's not a marriage, which is another solution I'll get to in a minute, but it's the idea of we can't live together, so we need to separate. This is a map that allows us to separate, creating a state of Palestine in Gaza and the West Bank, and that this would be the best solution. This is supported by Fatah, by Mahmoud Abbas, by Ram, Hadash, the Democratim, Yesh Atid, liberal Zionists, and pretty much every UN member state except for Israel and Iran. Ami Ayalon, who recently wrote in favor of a two-state solution in the journal Foreign Affairs, made the following three arguments for why a two-state solution is necessary for Israelis at the time as the only way to defeat Hamas. His first reason was that Israel cannot win this war merely by disarming Hamas and eliminating its leadership. Even if Israel prevails on the battlefield, Hamas's ideology will not disappear. The group will truly only be defeated when it loses the support of the Palestinian people. And for that to happen, they must have reason to believe in a diplomatic process that will bring about the creation of a Palestinian state alongside Israel. And from there, he goes on to say that you can win many battles and always lose the war if you don't have any sort of political strategy that happens at the end of the war, which is what his main critique of the government. And the example he uses of why this works is obviously the Israel-Egypt peace agreement, which happened after 4 horrific wars between Israel and Egypt between 1948 and 1973. I know about those wars because my father fought in 2 of them. And the Yom Kippur War killed 2,600 Israelis, tens of thousands of Egyptians. And after that war, there was a decision made that this is not something we would ever do again. And 4 years later, there was the Camp David Accords in 1979. Israel withdrew from the Sinai, which was an enormous piece of territory. in order to prevent future wars. And Egypt today are no lovers of Israel, but that peace is held. The peace is held for a very, very long time. And it's held much better than walls and checkpoints and all the other things we do for our security. Of course, there are walls between Israel and Egypt, but I think what keeps that peace agreement is the mutual interests of both Israel and Egypt to not return to what happened in 1973. And Ami Alon, who's the former head of the Shin Bet, concluded his article by saying, since October 7th, the motto, "Together we will win," has rallied the Israeli public in the fight against the perpetrators of that day's attack. But Israelis must remember that any military victory will turn into defeat if it undermines the core values of a Jewish and democratic state. Continuing on with the two-state solution, this is a speech that Kamala Harris gave at the DNC convention. It doesn't actually mention the two-state solution, but I think it's a very interesting articulation of US foreign policy under her leadership, what it might look like. She says, you know, on one hand, on the left, I think very much speaking to Israelis here, I will always stand up for Israel's right to defend itself and ensure Israel has the ability to defend itself so that October 7th never happens again. And then on the right, she says, at the same time, what has happened in Gaza over the past 10 months is devastating. So many innocent lives lost, desperate, hungry people fleeing for safety over and over again. The scale of suffering is heartbreaking. And she concludes by calling for Palestinian self-determination. This is not only the policy of the US, it's the policy of pretty much every single country in the UN in terms of supporting, the two-state solution is the policy of every country in the UN. This policy is the policy of the US, but I think the way that it's expressed is kind of language that you hear from many liberal democracies at the moment. You don't hear it obviously from Arab states, but you do hear it from liberal democracies like Canada, the US, many EU countries, etc. And all of this revolves around coming back to the two-state solution as the preferred outcome. Okay, the next solution is called a federation. So there are many federations in the world. Australia is a federation, the United States is a federation. There's about 30 other countries that have federations, which means that you have a federal government and then multiple states. So there's a movement in Israel called the Federation Movement. It's a very small movement, and it calls for the Palestinian Authority to be disbanded by agreement and for Israeli law to be applied to all parts of Judea, Samaria, and the Jordan Valley, with all Jewish residents of the West Bank remaining in place. So no one is forced to no one's removed from their homes under this solution. And then as part of this process, all Palestinian residents of the West Bank who so desire to receive full Israeli citizenship. So essentially they end up with the same status as Israeli Arabs. Importantly, the Israeli Federation does not include the Gaza Strip, and it has no solution for Gaza at all. Demographically, under this solution, Jews would comprise about 2/3 of the citizens of the Federation, while a third would be Palestinians. And in terms of what the map would look like, so the map that they have looks like this. So there are 30 states, or cantons as they call them, and each state has its own government. And in that government, they can determine the character of that state. So obviously the Arab majority states would be more Palestinian, Islamic, Christian, etc. in their character. The Jewish majority states could be more secular or Haredi, or depending on who lives there. You know, I'm sure the state of Tel Aviv would look very different from the state of Jerusalem. And it would give more autonomy to each of those states to determine how they want to feel. And each state would have 2 members of Knesset as well. So the Knesset would grow from 120 members of Knesset to 180 members of Knesset. And according to their website, they think that this is a good solution for everyone, because they say the settler population in the West Bank and right-wing voters will view it as a realistic annexation plan which transforms the West Bank into the state of Israel without risking a regional war. This plan will also enjoy support from the left since it promises equal rights to all residents and presents a realistic political solution to the conflict. The wider Jewish public will support the plan since it promises security and economic growth a large portion of the Arab population, both in Israel and the West Bank, will support the plan since it promises economic growth, civil rights, etc. I like to think of this as the Oprah solution. You know, when Oprah says, you get a car, you get a car. So here she's saying, like, you get a state, you get a state, everyone gets a state. We don't like each other. So maybe the idea of having lots of states could work. But on the other hand, this is a very, very small country. And I find it very hard to see how states would have autonomy where so many people in this country work in a so-called state that is not the state where they live, where they would, if the laws are different, if the education curriculum is different, if the taxation is different, these things aren't done in a universal way, it'd be very hard to manage such a solution in such a small state, but it's what they're proposing. So there it is. And the final option that I wanted to look at is called a confederation. So a confederation it's also a form of a one-state solution, but within that one state, there are two states. There's a organization that supports this called A Land for All, and their slogan is two states, one homeland. And so the way a confederation works is as follows. So you see the map there. So it has an element of the two-state solution in that Gaza and the West Bank are Palestine and pre-67 Israel is Israel, except unlike a two-state solution, which is kind of a divorce with the hard borders, here there would be what I would call like a soft border. So people would be able to travel in between Israel and Palestine quite freely for work, study, relationships, all of those sorts of things. And the model here is that there should be a right for everyone to have a national flag, a national anthem, a feeling of belonging in a state where they are, but people shouldn't be told that one part of the country is no longer theirs. So Palestinians have to feel that Haifa and Akka and Jaffa and all of these places that were part of Palestine before 48 should be theirs. They should be able to be there. And Israelis need to feel that Hebron and Gush Etzion and all the places in the West Bank should be part of Israel. And this allows everyone to say the whole land is mine, but it also creates within that two states that are expressions of those two nationalities. On their website of A Land for All, they say, in these days when many people on both sides cultivate the illusion that victory means defeat for the other side, our movement and our vision are more important than ever. Our principles are based on the shared interests of the two nations, not a zero-sum game, but a win-win for both sides. This stems from our understanding that only an agreement based on the interests and needs of both nations can lead to a safe life. And this is also obviously a movement that's based on trust, that's based on non-violence. They say quite clearly, war and bloodshed are not our preordained destiny. We are meant to live side by side, and we will not agree to live and die by the sword forever. We offer a way for a sustainable solution based on the physical, political, and emotional reality of two nations. Where I live in Jerusalem is one city that is home to two nations and three monotheistic religions and about 1 million opinions. The picture you can see here of the light rail is a train that goes through exactly on the 1967 border. So on the right-hand side is the municipality building, is Kikar Tzion, Rehov Yafo, what most people call West Jerusalem, the center of Jewish life. And on the left of this light rail that you can see here is the old city, which was obviously part of Jordan until 1967. And Jerusalem is essentially a version of a one-state solution that doesn't work because you've got the two populations here. You don't really have a divide between them aside from the Shufat refugee camp and Kfar Aqab. Most East Jerusalemites are not behind a wall. They are on the Israeli side of the wall. And we live with different statuses, and sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't work. So there's places where we coexist, like on the light rail, like in hospitals, like in our places of work. But when it comes to voting, we don't all vote for the same parliament. In fact, 95% of Palestinians are not Israeli citizens in East Jerusalem and can't vote for the Knesset. But for a confederation to work, I think the key ingredient is trust. You have to have two nations that want to share a country, And once you have that, this solution can work, but only when there is trust and a desire to share this land in this format. So in summary, what I've said up until now is that we have the one-state solution, which is Israel. We have the one-state solution, which is Palestine. We have a two-state solution, which is supported by, again, most UN member states. We have the federation movement, which is supported by some academics, but doesn't really have a wide movement. And then there's a confederation, which is supported by a lot of grassroots peace activists. So at this point, I'm going to pause for questions before I get into the second half of the talk. So Michael, if there are questions, or if anyone wants to write a question, Michael will read them out to me because I can't see them. Yeah.
Absolutely, there are. Thanks, Ittay. That was super informative as always. Folks, there are a lot of questions, so we'll do our best to make our way through them, but apologies if we don't get to yours. Keep them coming, keep writing them. There will be time. We do have a second half of this after the next section of Q&A as well. The first question comes to you from Janet in Melbourne. Janet wants to know basically what the views of Palestinian citizens of Israel are. Obviously recognizing that there's diversity in that, but can they be grouped in kind of key themes or key support amongst particular solutions?
Yeah, so most Palestinian citizens of Israel, according to polling, do support a two-state solution. The parties in the Knesset that represent Palestinian citizens of Israel support a two-state solution. Most think that it's not realistic at the moment. Therefore, the one-state solution obviously has growing support. But the thing with all of these solutions is a lot of it depends on what you see on the other side. So when you see, when they see, Netanyahu being fair and Smotrich, they go, well, I can't create a two-state solution with that. So I'm not going to support it. But if there was someone else in power, it's possible that those numbers would rise. And it's the same thing for Israelis. Most Israelis don't support a two-state solution because they see the other side and they see Hamas, obviously, which no Israeli wants to live with, and Abu Mazen and the corruption of the PA, and they don't see they don't see a way for it to happen, so they don't support it. For proponents of the two-state solution, people like Ami Aylon, I think the question that he didn't answer in his article, which is essential for making a two-state solution work, is you have to make both sides feel like there's a partner on the other side that wants it, because without that, it's a very unlikely solution to be realized.
Thanks for that, Ittay. I'm gonna read out the next one. It's from an anonymous questioner. They're just asking, considering the ongoing settlement expansion and the political divisions within both Israeli and Palestinian leadership, what do you think we would need to see happen on both sides in order to genuinely revive the two-state solution?
So beyond a partner, we need to do something called suspension of disbelief. At the moment, I'll give you an example. So when you hold a piece of paper, I'll give you an example. So I'm going to grab a piece of paper now from my wallet. Okay. And the piece of paper looks like this. Okay. It's got the number 50 on it. It's green. And everyone in my country believes that this isn't an ordinary piece of paper. Everyone in my country believes that with this piece of paper, you can buy a salad, which you can, but not at some places where it's gone up to 60 shekels. But we'll talk about cost of living later. We all believe in that. Even though it's just a piece of paper, we've all decided that that piece of paper is worth something, and our whole economy is based on that belief. Even though other pieces of paper that don't have that written on them are things that we don't believe that can do something. So at the moment, there is a widespread belief that there's no partner for peace on the other side, and all of our news and our reality, affirms that. And so therefore we act and we support policies and we support governments, I'm saying both Israelis and Palestinians, that pretend that there's no partner for peace on the other side. But if you are able to suspend disbelief, if you are able to imagine there was a partner for peace on the other side, everything you would do would be different. You would elect different people. You would relate to the other side in a different way. You would vote in a different way. You would work, study. The way you saw different people on the train would be different. but you just have to believe that they want to live with you. Now, I'm of the view, because I work with Palestinians in a joint Israeli-Palestinian youth organization, that I can live with Palestinians. So when I see Palestinians, I'm not afraid. I have been learning Arabic for 3 years. It's not something that, being in the company of Palestinians in East Jerusalem where I work is normal for me. Those Palestinians who work with me are also comfortable in Jewish spaces. A lot of them speak Hebrew and understand, our story and why we're here. But that challenge of suspension of disbelief that the other side wants to kill me is very hard during a war, because the war is horrible and many people are being killed and settlements are growing and there's horrific death toll in Gaza, and there's still rockets coming on Israel from Hezbollah and Hamas, and there's still hostages. And why would I believe that peace is possible when everything tells me it's not possible? But then the irony of that is, as long as you believe that peace isn't possible, it will remain a fantasy. So I guess the only way to change that is to engage in this suspension of disbelief, which is an enormously difficult thing to do. It's like splitting the Red Sea. I don't know how you get people that live in such a horrific circumstance to believe that the other side wants to live in peace with them. But that's what grassroots peace organizations do. That's where I work, and that's what I believe is the key to changing this reality.
Thanks for that. We have a couple of questions that basically ask what your preferred model is. What do you think is the most likely to be viable?
So the most viable option, or the most likely option, sorry, not the most viable, the most likely option is one state Israel. The reason I think that's the most likely option is because it's the current reality. It's also all the wheels in motion are affirming that. I think Israel is the more powerful side at the moment. So I think the most likely option is the one state Israel. I think it's possible that the settlement movement is getting stronger. I don't think they're going to settle Gaza anytime soon, but it's definitely something they want to do. It doesn't have popular support in Israel right now, but it could have popular support in the future. And to me, it's a frightening solution. It's unjust, it's unfair. And I believe this place should be a home for me, because I believe the Jews have a right to live here, and we have a deep ancestral connection to this land, and we have a right to feel safe here. But it shouldn't come at the expense of Palestinians, or at the expense of Muslims or Christians or Druze or any other minority. And for me, the only way to realize my self-determination and the self-determination of my neighbors is a confederation, which is the solution I support. That, of all the solutions, probably has the least amount of support. I think the likelihood of that happening is probably akin to, I don't know, Reagan winning the next Olympic medal in breakdancing. So it's not going to happen anytime soon. But I'm a dreamer. I think peace is something that doesn't happen in a day. That's why I work in education and not in politics, because if you want something to happen in 20 years from now, then you start working on it now, and you start with small conversations, and you start with showing people that, okay, we can't do this on a nationwide level. Let's do it with 100 people. Let's have a summer camp where for 5 days, 100 people live together, and there's kosher food, and there's halal food, and there's a Kabbalat Shabbat prayer, and there's Maghreb, and there's a Christian service, and all of the programs are in Hebrew and Arabic. Let's do that on a small level, and then let's build that up. Let's build movements like Standing Together, like Combatants for Peace, like the Parent Circle, and slowly show people that's possible. And this has happened in other causes. This is not like, it's not just me, weird fantasy, naive Ittay thinks peace is possible. Like, a lot of groups have done this successfully. Like, think about, like, 120 years ago, how many women could vote in the world? I think Adelaide was the only place they could vote, and now even in Saudi Arabia, women can vote. Like, everywhere women can vote, because the suffragettes, started a movement. They gradually built support. They faced immense opposition, and then over, 120 years, that happened. There's many other movements that have done that as well. But you have, and that's why, again, I go to suspension of disbelief. If I would have said to the suffragettes, one day there's going to be a female Prime Minister of Australia or a female Prime Minister of the UK, but both things that have happened, they would have laughed people are never going to vote for a woman Prime Minister. Soon there might be, please God, a female president of the US as well. Like, these things were unthinkable in many of our lifetimes. So change happens when you suspend disbelief about what is and you imagine what can be. And that's the power of education, and that's the power of believing in the reality doesn't have to be today, tomorrow, what it is today.
Look, I certainly believe in a ray gun Olympian gold medalist. So thank you for that, Ittay.
Yeah, look, it's something needed. I think it'll bring a lot of joy to Australians, and
yeah,
that's all about suspension of disbelief. I'm imagining Reagan on the podium. I'm imagining her, kangaroo hopping all the way to that gold medal in Brisbane.
yeah.
I want to see it happen at the Brisbane Olympics, and then when that happens, peace will happen too.
I reckon. No, I fully share your enthusiasm for Confederation, despite its challenges. We are a two-state organization. I do still,
Yeah.
boss at J Street would say, the only thing less likely than a two-state solution is all the others.
Yeah.
Yeah, I share your hope for a Confederation.
Mm.
A couple quick ones. A couple people asked about who abstained from the Knesset vote. They were interested when you spoke earlier about those who voted against a Palestinian state. Who are those 57, 58 who abstained?
Yeah, it was so 68 people voted in favor and 9 voted against. The people who abstained were Yesh Atid and the Labour Party. When I say abstained, they just weren't in the Knesset for the vote because I think they didn't want to vote yes or no. I mean, those two parties do support a two-state solution, but I think the fact that they weren't able to vote against that resolution says something, because I think they know that for many Israeli voters, voting for a resolution like that would not be let's say, electorally popular, and please God, will be an election here soon. And I don't think that's something they wanted on their voting record, which says something about, like, there's a lot of two-state solution people in the closet here, like, in the sense that you can't come out and vote for it and say it. And even though, there are people in this country who support it, I think the fact that they can't vote for it in the Knesset, even the parties that are meant to sort of represent that ideology, says something about why the two-state solution is in such a terminal state in Palestine and Israel at the moment.
Yep, totally. Another quick one. We have questions about a last episode of From the Yarra, your podcast with Hannah Baker.
Yeah, so for those that haven't heard it, I did make a podcast of From the Yarra River to the Mediterranean Sea, where Hannah lives in Melbourne, and we interviewed many Israeli and Palestinian peacemakers, bereaved families, people that believe peace is possible, and we spoke to them about why they believe what they do, and it really goes into a lot of depth about these different solutions. The podcast ended just because Hannah and I are both busy people, and we needed to go on with our lives. So unfortunately, will not be any more episodes in the near future, but we will communicate in other ways. Yes. Yeah.
Terrific. Just have a couple more, and then, folks, we will go back to the second half of this. Ittay is going to take us to how we get to these solutions. So before we do that, just one of the media ones comes from Vivian. Vivian's asking Ittay if there's any thought given to land area and kind of how that would relate if you were to try and apportion, say, the equivalent land mass of Gaza versus the respective balances in the West Bank and Judea, Samaria, and the occupied territories to avoid partition and to develop.
Yeah, look, so it's interesting because the population split, as I said, is 50-50. But under a two-state solution, 78% is Israel and 22% is Palestine. So that's clearly not 50-50. A lot of that has to do with, obviously, the Israeli Arabs wanting to keep their Israeli citizenship. But I think the likelihood of a 50-50 kind of split is very unlikely, given where people live and where that sort of thing exists. But I think beyond the sort of numbers and the maps and all of that sort of thing. I think for any solution to work, there has to have a sense of fairness about it. I think any solution that the other side feels isn't fair isn't going to work. Something we did at Kids for Peace, where I work, is we took a group of 12 kids to Northern Ireland in 2019 to look at what we could learn from the peace process there, where, for those that aren't familiar, the Catholics, want all of Northern Ireland to be Ireland, and the Protestants want it to be part of the UK. And so there was a dilemma of, how could we make peace without deciding what the status of this land will be? Will be part of Ireland, will be part of the UK. And when they had their peace agreement, 71% voted yes in a referendum, which is way higher than you would ever get for Oslo. And I think one of the reasons is, without going into the details of that agreement, it had enough constructive words there that people thought it was fair, but it was also ambiguous enough that both sides felt they won. And I think that's the key, that you make a solution that both sides feel like, this sees me, this tells my story, this says my narrative, but doesn't feel like a total capitulation to the whims of the other side. Should we go into part two?
I'll take us to part two with a number of different questions that I think will follow into that.
Sure.
A lot of people want to know where you're getting your optimism from, Ittay. A lot of people want to know what keeps you excited about the future.
I really like Za'atar from the Old City, and Za'atar is not the same as heroin. They have different properties, but when I have Za'atar from the Old City, it just makes me feel good. So Za'atar is good with hummus and pita. I have it for breakfast. That was my non-serious answer, but my serious answer is that I live in peace. Like, I work in a peace organization. I have Palestinian friends. I learn Arabic with Palestinians. I tell jokes with Palestinians. Like, I experience peace in my life. I know most Israelis don't do that, and that's why they can't believe it's possible. But I think if I didn't live or work with Palestinians in East Jerusalem, then I wouldn't believe what I believe. But I believe it because that's my experience. Thankfully, my kids weren't taken hostage on October 7th. I live in Jerusalem, which has faced very few rockets, from Gaza or Lebanon. I feel like, that big golden dome we have in the middle of our city is, for me, it's like our Iron Dome. Like, I think that golden dome is what keeps me safe. That is that the fact that we are a city where a lot of Jews and Palestinians live together is obviously something that sometimes makes this place very violent, but I think it makes this place holy. And I think ultimately everyone is fighting for this place. And I'm sitting here in the eye of the storm, tasting peace, and I want that to spread throughout the world. And that's why I write and teach and do all the things I do, because I think that's very important.
Great. With that, I'll say, please do keep your questions coming. We do appreciate them. I know there was too many to get to, but there will be more time. And I'll give it back to Ittay for the second half of this. Thank you, Ittay.
Yeah, so for the second half, I wanted to speak a little bit about NIF. So the New Israel Fund also is thinking about these questions, obviously, and I've been working as a writer in the development team of the New Israel Fund part-time for the last year or so. And NIF has a strategy called building and blocking. So to break that down simply, it says blocking extremists and building a better future. So what does that mean? It means that NIF is trying to throw sand in the gears of annexation. And the way it's doing that is through the first strategy, which is supporting grantees who are trying to block annexation. So groups like Yesh Din, Breaking the Silence, Ulat, Akri, any groups that are using protests, that are using legal challenges, that are using international pressure, anything that they can do to stop the annexation of the West Bank or the resettlement of Gaza becoming a reality. That includes public campaigns, ads on TVs, newspapers, conferences, anything that can sort of build a constituency that will block annexation. Then Shatil also supports activists on the ground who are doing things like protective presence, stopping Palestinians from having their land taken away from them, stopping, trying to stop house demolition of olive groves. all of these sorts of things. Standing Together is obviously very active in that as well. Also, you know, providing aid to people in Gaza, which Standing Together is doing at the moment, as a way of saying that there's another way that's possible. And then, in addition to, you know, organizations that are fighting the occupation and fighting the far right government, NIF's also trying to build a movement for a different reality. About 3 months ago, this was sent to the homes of hundreds of thousands of Israelis. This is the English edition of Haaretz that it came in, and it also came in Hebrew in the Hebrew edition of Haaretz, and then it was also, you know, on websites and billboards and other places. It's called the Israeli Initiative. It's a 30-page booklet that outlines in great detail how you get from the current reality we're in now to a two-state solution, all the steps that need to happen, what the regional aspect of that would be involved. It's written by a think tank called Mitvim, which is an NIF grantee. It's a really interesting document if you're not sure if you believe in a two-state solution, it's something you want to see, and you want to know how do you get from where we are today to that point. I think it lays it out in a very clear roadmap. And what NIF is trying to do is trying to put those ideas out into the public, because there's a lot of similar booklets that have come out from the right. And so having one like this that people can go to as a plan is essential to, again, going back to what I said before, which is suspension of disbelief, of stopping people from thinking such a thing is possible. Now, in order to have a political solution, you also need people to vote for it. So on July the 1st, NIF coordinated a massive event at a basketball stadium in Tel Aviv, where I was present. Was very moving, because often when I think of people who I know that believe in peace, you know, it's me and my minion of friends in Jerusalem, and that's about it. And so to see, you know, 5,000 people in the basketball stadium for speeches, for music, for videos, for all sorts of, you know, felt like a pep rally really, about why peace is possible, I think was incredibly significant. And these are the kind of activities that you need to do to give people the optimism that another way is possible. Some of the people who spoke there were Yuval Noah Harari. There were, you know, singers, religious leaders. There were released hostages that spoke about peace as well. Survivors of October 7th, like Avi Dabush. It was a very incredible event. You can find it on the Women Wage Peace and the NIF websites if you want to watch the whole thing. But I think these are the kind of things that help build a movement and a constituency that wants this reality to happen. So that's a little bit about what NIF is doing. I will say, just before I go back to questions, that I also write for the Jewish Independent, and I write a lot of articles about highlighting coexistence. So this is a column I wrote a couple of weeks ago about Jewish and Palestinian professors who teach at, of all places, Columbia University. And they teach together a course on journalism about the Middle East. I interviewed both of them about how they do that during this war. And I think, you know, reading, sharing, understanding the stories of peace builders, whether they be here or in the US or in Australia, and highlighting them boosts the number of people who think that peace is possible. And the last thing I want to say before we go back to questions is that I've spent the last year writing a book, which will come out next year with HarperCollins. And that book is really everything that I've said here and so much more, about why this land can be shared and how would we go about that? What would our education system look like? What would our schools look like? What would our universities look like? What would our hospitals look like? What would our journalism look like? And this book is really me imagining peace after the brokenness that we've all experienced since October 7th. And I hope that people will read this, and the number of people who believe that peace is possible will only grow. So that's something to look forward to next year. And from there, I'll go back to your questions.
Thanks so much, Ittay. I really do appreciate all of that. And yes, it certainly does fill us with hope looking to some of those solutions. So
Mm.
thanks. The questions have continued to come. I'll put a couple to you. And I think in particular, I'll pull out, there was a couple of different questions related to neighbors or engagement with partners for peace where there's a disparity of will. I'll pull out Harold, for example, from Melbourne. Do you have any experience of anti-normalization in the contact you have with Palestinians?
Yeah, of course, there's anti-normalization. It exists all the time. A lot of events that peace organizations do, they don't always advertise them publicly. They just advertise them through WhatsApp groups. There's also, from the Israeli side, it's very hard to protest against the war in Israel, for example. People have been arrested for doing that. But I think a lot of Palestinians are not interested in grassroots peace building because they say it hasn't got us anywhere. And I obviously understand that critique completely, because we look at our reality now and it's worse than it's ever been. And so I understand why people don't believe it's possible. But I think when you go into that despair, maybe it's more realistic. It probably is more realistic. But the only place that despair can take you is to violence. That despair can't take you anywhere else other than violence and resistance and more armies and more wars and more walls and more checkpoints and just repeating what we've done. So while I see that's there, it's like this cloud sitting on my shoulder. I know it's there. I also know that it's not going to take me anywhere to go into that.
Thanks, Ittay. I'll take you to a similar theme. Andrew from Melbourne's asking, please talk about the potential effects of surrounding anti-Israel states or failed states on the internal stability of federation and confederation. So what's the kind of timeline, or what's the road to trust that would establish a federation and confederation?
So look, there's the 2002 Arab Peace Initiative, where pretty much every Arab state in the world said that if there was a two-state solution here, they would completely normalize relations with Israel. Saudi Arabia has said that. In fact, a week before October 7th, there was a lot of reports about almost what seemed like an imminent normalization with Saudi Arabia. Obviously, that didn't happen. But I think obviously there's great hostility to Israel around the world, some of it motivated by anti-Semitism. And it's clearly very frightening. I know it's very frightening for Australian Jews. And I know a lot of Australian Jews almost feel like they're at war at the moment, in a very different war than I am at the moment. But I sense that, and I can't promise you that when there's peace, all of that will change. Because this war has been horrific. I just hope that it will, but I don't know. I don't know how all those other states and the sentiment that exists in the streets against Israel will be different. Understand why it's there. Understand why the anger is there. I watch images from Gaza every day. I know people that live in Gaza, and it's just unfathomable what I see there. The scenes from the hospitals, the scenes of how people line up for food with hundreds of people lining up for a bowl of soup. Things that you shouldn't see in a modern Western liberal country that you see from there. So I understand that anger, and that's going to take a lot of time to healing. And yeah, there'll need to be not only a truth and reconciliation process between Israelis and Palestinians when there's peace, but there'll also need to be one in all places in the world where supporters of Israel and Palestine have fallen apart so much.
On the matter of truth and reconciliation, we've got someone asking if you draw any inspiration from the Australian model as a former Aussie, as an Aussie. What's the Australian model of reconciliation teach us, and can any of that be mapped onto an Israeli-Palestinian situation now or in the future?
Yeah. So look, there's some things Australia has done well. I think like the national apology, the Redfern speech of Paul Keating, the Mabo decision. There's definitely been progress in that area. But then on the other hand, you had, on October 14th, what I thought was a very simple yes or no question couldn't even get 50%. So, and then added to that, there isn't currently a violent conflict between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. And even with no violent conflict, you still couldn't get to a 50% yes vote. So while Australia, I think, is well ahead of where Israel and Palestine are, it's still got a long way to go. But I think what's interesting, what's happening in Australia now that I find interesting, maybe less so this year, but it definitely was happening during the referendum. A lot of people, putting aside what you thought about the yes/no question, use that referendum to learn about the dreaming, to learn about Indigenous languages, to learn about the meaning of acknowledgement of country, to learn about song lines, maybe to visit Indigenous communities. Indigenous people were on the media in Australia in the lead up to that referendum far more than they've ever been in my lifetime, because all of a sudden people had to vote and they saw, okay, well, what should I vote? I want to know what the story is. What's the issue here? And so I think doing, public acts, even though I think the outcome was horrible, but I think doing anything that can educate large numbers of people over long periods of time about multiple narratives is essential. I can tell you, like, if you talk about reconciliation, in Israeli schools, we learn nothing about the Nakba, about the occupation, about checkpoints, about what life is like for Palestinians. We don't know about their culture. We don't do Debka dances. We don't learn about Palestinian food, or we just told it's Israeli food. Same thing, what Palestinians learn about Zionism or Israeli Jewish culture is, that we came from somewhere else and we have no connection to here, etc. So I don't think you can have peace with education systems that don't teach peaceful messages. And again, that's why peace education. I mean, in my book, I have a whole chapter on peace education and what it could look like, because I think that's also an essential ingredient. And I think when I was a teacher in Australia, when I was a student, I learned nothing about Indigenous people. By the time I was a teacher, I was teaching a course of Aboriginal studies, and I was running the Yori Yori Biachad program at Scopus, and I was, giving Jewish kids an opportunity to understand this history and this narrative and the people that belong here, and what are their experiences, and then going on country and seeing sacred places and doing smoking ceremonies and all these sorts of things. And so I think that is all part of the peace process. It's not just men in suits talking about that. And by the way, just on the subject of men in suits, there needs to be women as well. Like, all of these negotiations in Doha and Cairo, there's no women there, not a single woman. Rachel Goldberg Poland wrote an incredible poem called "To the Boys in the Room." It's a poem you should look. Just Google "The Boys in the Room," where she imagines what would happen if all these negotiations were being done by women, and she's sure that there would have been a deal by now. And I think that there's some merit to that as well, of what happens when you exclude women from peace building as well, is another big problem.
Rachel Goldberg Poland being the mother of Hirsch, the hostage.
Yeah, mother of Hirsch. And by the way, I'll say she used to work at Pardes with my wife, Carm, who also works at Pardes, so we know the family well. And Hirsch is the hostage of Jerusalem. Like, it's hard for me to describe how much I see Hirsch every day, because there's hostage posters for all over the country, but because Hirsch is the most notable Jerusalem hostage, really every bus station, graffiti, flags, signs from people's houses, especially in the neighborhood where I live, I see Hirsch all the time. And so I think about him a lot more than all the other hostages, because I know the family, and because he's an Anglo, and because, he was a part of organizations that I'm part of, and I feel his presence very deeply. And I think Rachel's an incredible inspiration of being not only the mother of a hostage, but whenever she speaks, she also always addresses Palestinian suffering, and she humanizes people on the other side. And that's an incredible thing to do when Hamas stole your child from the Nova Party and have kept him in captivity for over 300 days. And I think for me, she's a great role model, and I think she's someone we all have a lot to learn from.
Beautiful. Yeah. Well, sticking with your earlier point on pedagogy, Fadi from Sydney is asking, is asserting that he believes that there should be a focus on pedagogy of discomfort in the education system that helps to kind of address difficult questions. He's asking, do you think this is happening on both sides of the border?
No, it's not. I can talk about Israeli schools because I know from my kids, Israeli schools are very patriotic at the moment, very flag waving, very, collecting goods for soldiers, that sort of thing. I'm not sure what's happening in Palestinian schools, but I would imagine it's there's a lot of grief and sadness and disbelief about what's happening there. I think you can only do education that is confronting when you have the backing of the education system and the parents and all of that sort of thing. And peace education, the peace education that happens in Palestine and Israel at the moment doesn't happen in schools. It happens outside of schools because it's almost impossible to do it in schools under Palestine education system or Israel education system. Probably the notable exception is the hand-in-hand school, which there's about 7 joint Jewish Arab schools in the country that do that. But otherwise, it's very hard to do. But for me, that's the future. That's where you have to start. And I think the more kids that go to schools like that or youth movements like Kids for Peace, that's how you will eventually grow this movement that will create a different reality in the future.
Thanks, Ittay. Susan's asking about Four Corners last night. I'm not sure if you had a chance to watch Four Corners, but on it, it goes into the regional element of the conflict. And
Okay.
specifically, she's asking, because both Hezbollah and Hamas rely upon Iranian support, a peaceful solution is ultimately in Iran's hands. They rely upon Iran for its continuation.
Yes.
Do you agree with that assessment?
I don't know how many of you know about Masha Amini, the girl from Iran that was executed for not wearing a hijab. But after her killing, there was this women life freedom movement, that wore green, that they did protests all over Iran, and they were, it's very hard to protest in Iran today. But I often imagine what would happen if that movement was successful, if there was an internal movement within, because I know Iran is not the Iranian regime. The Iranian people, especially those that don't live in Iran, they feel like their country's been kidnapped by this regime and by the Ayatollahs, and a lot of Iranians don't support their government. And in the same, every country has its own struggle, but I think the people behind the women life freedom movement in Iran, I pray that they will one day be successful in overturning their regime and getting Iran back from the Islamic Republic, because they deserve to have their own country back from this horrible leadership. And when that happens, I think it changes the whole Middle East. So again, I can only hope that they will one day be successful in making that a reality.
Amen. Amen. I think we have a couple that are curious about your work. Judy in Melbourne's keen to know how Kids for Peace is operating in these times.
Yeah, so we suspended our programs for several months after October 7th. A lot of people felt, in the early months of the war, very afraid to leave the home. They felt a sense of, people didn't know if another October 7th was going to happen in Jerusalem, around Al-Aqsa, or around the Kotel, around, any other holy place. Thankfully, at least for me, this war has not been frightening, but I know it is for people still in East Jerusalem. I think also the idea of coming to a youth group where our group is fun, we have music, we play games. It's like Hubbo, but maybe different from Hubbo, but like we we don't just sit and cry, like it's with kids, and so there's always a sense of, is that an appropriate thing to do now when so many of us have loved ones, who are affected by this war in different ways. And so we did meet this year only 3 times. And, as we say, inshallah, next year we hope to resume our complete programs when the school year resumes, which is in a couple of weeks, because I think it's very important. But and again, I write this in my book as well, like there's a lot of challenges of doing peace work in normal times, but peace work during a war is, 1,000 times more difficult. And there's no handbook on how to do this. So when I was a teacher at school, I want to teach English, there's an English textbook. When I want to teach history, there's a history textbook. No one's written a textbook on how to do Israeli-Palestinian peace. It doesn't exist because it changes all the time, and there aren't any rules, and you constantly have to deal with changing environments and hostility and challenges from parents and kids, stuff that kids post on social media that makes other kids feel uncomfortable. And I deal with that all the time in my work, but I think I think it's really important, and I hope it's something that people here want, and that it's something that can grow. Because again, I don't see any other future for us here if we can't find a way to be in each other's space, holding on to our differences, but accepting that this needs to be a home for everyone.
Ittay, I really can't think of a better note to leave off on than that. What a beautiful sentiment. I really think that we at NIF are invested in precisely that future. We have every faith that with people like you, we will get to that future, and that's why we invest in so many nonprofits and civil society organizations all across the country. There may be an incredible darkness looming over the region right now, but I share your optimism. I share your memory of history and how things have changed so quickly. So folks, please, if you do want to be a part of that vision, so many of you already are, of course, but you're always welcome to support NIF at the link that I'm dropping in the chat. That's nif.org.au/donate. I want to thank you all for being on tonight. We really appreciate the time. We really appreciate you, Ittay, making the time to walk us through all of these concepts and answer so many questions. I apologize. I think there was probably another 50 that we didn't get to, but
Yeah, I'm reading through them now. There's I saw Stephen Broder asked about the Anachnal movement. There's the founder of that, I know him, is interviewed on the Unapologetic podcast. It's a really interesting solution. Sorry, I didn't have time to look at that, but I recommend listening to that as well.
Yofi, great plug. And there'll certainly be
Yeah.
more opportunities to answer some of these as well. I can keep writing in, folks. We will direct questions to Ittay, and we appreciate all of the enthusiasm. A huge thanks to Amy for making this all happen. Amy Grossbard on NIF staff. We really appreciate you setting this all up and making it a reality. So thanks again, everyone. Have a great night.
Yeah.